Thank you so much for virtually joining us today. My name is Jacqueline Sawyer, and I am the VP of Education and Engagement at the National Building Museum. The National Building Museum is the country's foremost institution dedicated to telling the stories about and inspiring curiosity in our built world, the places where we live, work, and play. For over 4 decades, we've presented celebrated exhibitions and programs that have touched on everything from design and construction to advances in sustainability and resilience to social justice and equity issues. I want to thank and recognize Autodesk as the presenting sponsor for today's virtual event. From greener buildings to smarter products to mesmerizing blockbusters, Autodesk software helps their customers design and make a better world for all. Today, we will explore how Autodesk's Building Information Modeling, or BIM technology, can assist with the preservation of heritage sites and the reimagining of cultural landscapes. We are grateful to Autodesk for partnering with us on this event. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our speaker, Emmanuel Di Giacomo, AEC EMEA Ecosystem Manager and Architect at Autodesk. With more than 7 years experience as a BIM technical advisor for the Southern Europe region, Emmanuel currently serves as head of BIM ecosystem development for Europe at Autodesk. He also highlights the construction industry and new technologies and news on his blog, one of the most widely read in Europe. Emmanuel?
Thank you, Jacqueline, and hello, everyone. I'm really happy, and Autodesk thanks very much the National Building Museum for this opportunity to present all the work that we've been doing on the Notre-Dame project. So as Jacqueline was mentioning, Autodesk is deeply involved in the world to make this world a better place. And as you all remember, so in April 2019, there was a big drama with the fire that completely destroyed Notre-Dame. It was completely devastated by an intense fire, and straight away Autodesk stepped into this project to help, first of all, with a cash donation. And then our CEO, Andrew Anagnost, really wanted, because he felt really emotional about it, he really wanted to help with the reconstruction of Notre Dame. So we've been thinking about the way we could help in the reconstruction process, and we decided that we could, first of all, donate some software, help the team in charge of the reconstruction of Notre Dame, and above all, we decided to help with the creation of a 3D model, so called the BIM model, in order to fasten the reconstruction process. Hopefully, also, we've been working with a French firm called Art Graphique and Patrimoine, AGP, which has been specialized for more than 20 years in the reconstruction of historical monuments in 3D. So the French Parliament also created an organization called EPA in charge of the reconstruction of Notre Dame, and we've been interacting since then with this organization. So why did we decide to use BIM and to propose to be using BIM for the reconstruction of Notre Dame? Because BIM is a process which allows to fasten reconstruction and construction processes of building, generally speaking, and also it helps in not having any kinds of issues on construction site, and also getting a very good and deep understanding of an existing buildings and recreate a perfect and precise 3D model of these historical monuments, as well as new monuments, of course. So the first step was to recreate a 3D model of the existing state of Notre Dame before the fire. This is what we call a scan-to-BIM process, actually. So thanks to laser scanning, we were able, together with AGP, to recreate a point cloud model of Notre Dame. So as you can see it on the screen at the top of this PowerPoint presentation, it's a point cloud model, a colored point cloud models, which is a kind of 3D model that you can reuse to build a real 3D model on top of it. So it's kind of really precise because it allows you to recreate any element which corresponds to reality. And it resulted in a unique, what we call scan to BIM process based on this point cloud model. You can see at the bottom the 3D model of Notre Dame that we will be seeing in details. In the perspective of this recreation of the BIM model, which would help, to fasten the reconstruction process and, for example, work on elements like carpentry or stone masonry, etc., we decided to go for what we call a LOD, which is a level of detail 300, which is one of the highest. So from the left to the right, you can see the point cloud model on the left. Then at the center, the mix of the point cloud model together with the 3D model, which is a 3D reconstruction, geometrical 3D reconstruction with information of a piece of Notre-Dame Cathedral. And on the right side, you can see the single 3D model of Notre Dame, which constitutes the final model that is going to be used by the reconstruction teams. This gave birth to a high fidelity model fully designed with Revit. So Revit is a 3D software designed by Autodesk, of course, and it's one of the most used 3D software in the world and BIM software in the world. So as you can see from this image, it's a very fidel, and it's the first time that such a huge historical monument has been completely remodeled using these kinds of technology. There is no equivalent. We have to say that there is no equivalent in the world of these kinds of historical monuments, and specifically in the sector of historical monuments is the first time. And as you can see, it's not only about the cathedral itself, but it's about the crypt, the sacristy, and also the courtyard, which is in front of Notre Dame, as well as the piece of garden, which is behind Notre Dame, which is very important because most of the trees are protected by the Historical Monument Organization in Paris. So why BIM, which is a process which signify building information modeling? So why BIM is important and why BIM is so useful in the context of the reconstruction of such an important monument? It's important because in BIM, building information modeling, you have the eye, and the eye is very important. The eye corresponds to the information. And thanks to the quality of this modeling, and thanks to the quality and the accuracy of this modeling, which ranges between 1 to 4 centimeters based on the point cloud, we are allowed to extract any kind of information from this model. So we know precisely, for example, the cube meters of stone walls, which currently are 30,000 cube meters, sorry. We know also perfectly the number of square meters of zinc roofings that are necessary to rebuild Notre Dame. We know precisely the number of volts, 186 volts, and we know the diameters and dimensions of any kinds of elements on these models. And you can perfectly understand that it's important because you would not go every day on the field to measure any kind of element. So once you have this 3D model, you can reuse it at any moment, measure it inside the 3D model, and make any kind of analysis based on that. So here, as you can see it on this dynamic section, it creates really lots of value to the multiple reconstruction teams. And you know that sometimes on the field, it's not easy for workers or any kind of team to understand the way the cathedral or any kind of building or monuments was created and the complexity of the different parts of this monument. So this is where BIM is really helping a lot. So how does Autodesk technology help? So when we started this journey with the EPA, we were envisioning several use cases. So as you can see it on the screens, like explaining the complexity of the structural geometry or extracting 2D documentation or creating planning and phasing for the reconstruction, etc. But at the end of the day, we decided to focus on 3 specific use cases for the use of this 3D model. So we decided to focus on using this 3D model for the reconstruction planning and phasing, because as you can understand, when you build or rebuild a monument or any kind of building, you need to plan it. This is where 4D, which is the 4th dimension corresponding to time, goes into the place, and the phasing, which is about to say, what should we be working on first? Is it about rebuilding the stone masonry? Is it about creating the carpentry, etc.? And this is where it's very important to have a 3D model and to use the 4D part of it. Also, we've decided to use this 3D model for site installation and logistic management, because it's very challenging to plan when the trucks will arrive on site, when they will bring the materials, etc., and where they have to bring them, etc. So here, BIM plays a very important role. And finally, we thought it was important as well to facilitate the collaboration between all the stakeholders involved in this project with our collaboration platform called Autodesk Construction Clouds. You have to understand that is very important, because on such a reconstruction site, you have something like 2,500 workers every day working on the field. So you have to make sure that everyone will be able to collaborate all together and benefit from the rich information contained in this 3D model. Here you can see some images of the collaboration platforms, allowing any kind of persona, whether it's an engineer, an architect, or a worker involved in the reconstruction of Notre-Dame. They are able to manipulate the 3D model, to click on any kind of information, to get some any kind of element, to get some information saying that, for example, this is a column, it's this height and this diameter, etc., and it's located at this place. So the collaboration is really critical to the success and time saving, because President Macron, President of France, had decided that Notre Dame should be rebuilt by 2024. So here is the typical scan to BIM production workflow, where on the left side, you can see the scanning systems, and then after you can see the remodeling with technologies like Revit or AutoCAD and 3ds Max, allowing to create 3D models that we are then able also to compile. So you can see it on the right side of the screen, to create some virtual reality environments, allowing all the stakeholders to dive into these 3D models and understand what to do in which part of the monument. So during the 3D scanning campaign, Art Graphic and Patrimoine has been doing what we call data acquisition, and they had to put lots of laser scans on top of Notre Dame in order to create some point clouds, assemble them and clean them. So here you can see that we were lucky enough, working with AGP also, to have access to some point clouds corresponding to the era before the fire, which allowed us to create a pre-fire model. And then we create, of course, a post-fire model, and we compared both versions. So the real 3D scanning campaign started, of course, after April 2019, because it was asked by the architects of the historical monuments and also the owner, which is the Ministry of Culture in France. And you can see the scaffolding on this left image, which was left on the place because it was completely melted. So AGP's team had to do all the scannings using laser scannings and using drones as well to create drone surveys in order to scan all the building. On the top left part of this slide, you can see the positions, the different positions of the laser scanners. And you can see that there are tons of them. So it's only a small piece of Notre Dame, which resulted in several different point clouds models that you can see on the screens now, and that were assembled, cleaned, and prepared for the 3D modeling process. You may understand it, recreating a BIM model, specifically on a cathedral like Notre Dame, is a real big challenge because it's not a square building like a modern building, as you can see it from this side plane view. Notre Dame is not perpendicular at all, it's completely distorted. And it was really important to define and find some strategies to model in 3D these completely non-vertical and non-horizontal elements. And this is where the knowledge and the experience of companies like AGPs using our technologies like Revit were kind of very important for the success of this enterprise. Here you can see from the North Tower of Notre Dame that the lateral big sustaining walls of Notre Dame were completely remodeled using some specific approaches in order to create some voids and removing the extra material that was on the walls that were used to create this model. So this was really time-consuming and really challenging. Here you can see the main rows on the north facade, the west facade, that is the most important of Notre Dame. Of course, we have not been modeling lots of elements on Notre Dame. We decided also not to model some specific decoration, etc., because they were not useful, for the reconstructing teams. And as you can see, from the beauty of, for example, the detail on the right side of the rows, that it's enough, for the construction team on site. Also, another challenge is to interpret and simplify reality, because of course you will not model everything that is on top of Notre Dame. So you have to find a way to simplify reality. Here is an example. And here you can see the perfect combination between the point cloud and also the reconstructed geometry of Notre Dame. You can see that it perfectly aligns, etc., although it's completely complex and different. Managing complexity is not only at the external of the building, but it's also internally. Here you can see the choir of Notre Dame, which is the rear part of the cathedral, and you can see that all the surrounding walls are all completely different from each other. You have to understand as well that there are 186 vaults in Notre Dame, and each vault is different, which meant that we had to create some specific 3D elements, completely flexible, that allowed the 3D modelers to perfectly assemble and position these small columns. As you can see it on the screen here, the columns are completely bended and the horizontals are not horizontals at all. So it was a real challenge to manage distortions. Also, still about the interpretation and simplification of reality, here is another example of what we call the red door, which is on the left side of Notre Dame. Another interesting example that you can see here, so here it's a screenshot of the interface of Revit, and you can see the 3D model directly inside this 3D software interface. You can see that the interior columns, which are the biggest one inside Notre Dame, are really completely different from one level to another, which means that we had to model pieces by pieces on each single element vertically. On the right side, you can see some small screenshots showing the arches of Notre Dame that were, as I was mentioning before, all different one from each other. So here is the resulting model. So kind of, it's a cut section, horizontal cut section. You can see the beauty of the modeling and also the beauty of understanding what is underneath the shell and the skin of Notre Dame. And here you can see with the vault, for example, and the roofs. And here you can see a special perspective section of Notre Dame, which clearly shows the beauty of Notre Dame. And it's really amazing. So when we speak about recreating a 3D model of such a monument, it's not only about 3D, it's also about being able to recreate some 2D views that will be used by the historians, archaeologists, people involved in the construction, etc. Because be aware of the fact that there was no existing 2D documents about Notre Dame. So they had to completely redraw. So AGP had to completely redraw the plans, the sections, the facades, the details for better representation of the cathedral, because obviously the 3D model was not highly detailed. So 2D is still a very important part of the process. And this is where it was nice to have a basis like the 3D model. So a 3D model is also very interesting because I was mentioning that it contains all the information. And thanks to this 3D model, you can also perform some what we call CFD simulation, computational fluid dynamic simulations, allowing, for example, in that case, to verify the future resistance of what we call the spire, which is the central part of the roofing system of Notre Dame. And it allows to see where eventually there would be some pushes or some weaknesses on the future roof of Notre Dame. So this was performed, by the way, by the French Scientific and Technical Center for the Building Industry based on our BIM model. Something very important as well is the possibility to operate and maintain a building in the future using what we call a digital twin. So a digital twin is a perfect twin representation of an existing building, and it allows, when it's connected with IoT, Internet of Things, like sensors and captors. So it can be any kind of captors or sensors. It could be humidity sensors, presence of people, smoke, temperature, humidity, etc. And here you can see the small bubbles, the orange bubbles corresponds to the sensors, and you can see the gradients corresponds here in that case to the temperature inside Notre Dame. And why is it so important to have the possibility to use a digital twin? Because let's imagine that there would be a raise of temperatures related to, for example, a fire or the presence of a heating system, etc. At least it could directly and dynamically inform the owners of the building that there is something wrong happening. Here you have the CO2, you have the humidity. Here you can see a small map on the top right corner, and you can see it's kind of twinkling because it's showing what's happening. Here it's the presence of people. And we could also use this kind of digital twin to anticipate the evacuation of such a building in case of any kinds of issue. So it's very important. This is something we've been discussing with the owners of Notre Dame. This is nothing that has been decided so far, but it's the future of historical monuments, and it will definitely allow to preserve them from any kind of future issues. Here is another example. So this is a 3D view of Notre Dame. And this 3D view of Notre Dame really shows you the perfection of this building. So BIM, to conclude on that part of the presentation, will allow to build faster, better, with less resources, and to protect our heritage for the future. So in the meantime, it was decided by the city of Paris to reimagine the surroundings of Notre Dame because it had not been redesigned since a while. And we know that it was not maybe the most efficient surroundings for Notre Dame. So they decided to launch an international competition. And as we've been partnering with the city of Paris in July 2019 around also an international competition to redesign the surroundings of the Eiffel Tower, they proposed us to participate also in this international competition to redesign the perimeter around Notre Dame that you can see on the right side on this top view of Notre Dame with its garden behind and also the big place in front of Notre Dame. So they have asked us to provide them with a digital terrain model of all the area concerning this international competition. And this would allow all the competing teams to integrate their project into this digital model in order to be able for the jury to extract 5 precise views, perspective views, and also to dive into a 3D virtual reality model. So allowing, therefore, for the jury to better understand the proposals of each candidate. So here you can see the view of this existing model. So it's very beautiful. We have been remodeling all the surroundings. We have been partially reusing also the 3D model of Notre Dame to recreate the existing condition of Notre Dame. As you can see here, there is the crypt at the center. There is an existing parking. And the goal of this project of the redefinition of the surroundings of Notre Dame was to make a new proposal of Notre Dame for tourists for the future, etc. So everything was remodeled. Also, you can see the trees. I told you before, the trees were protected by the historical monuments organization, and we had to remodel everything perfectly in order to make sure that once every competing team, so there were basically 4 competing teams with, so each group was consisting of 10 different kinds of professional architects, urban planners, sociologists, etc. And then they were able, it allowed them to integrate all their solutions. So we've been partnering with an American company, WSP, which created the 3D models. And to create the 3D model, we've been asking AGP to provide specialized LiDAR conditions, which are point cloud models, in order to make sure that we would be able to create this 3D precise model. So as you can see it on the screen, here is a point cloud model of Notre Dame, but above all, the surroundings of Notre Dame. And thanks to these point clouds, you can see all the black bubbles corresponds to the positions of the laser scanners. And also it was also combined with drone surveying. And they were able then to create a 3D model. So as you can see it on the screens, we've been modeling using different kinds of technologies like Revit for the buildings, Recap to clean and prepare all the point cloud models, and 3ds Max, which is an award-winning solutions used in the media and entertainment world, and also InfraWorks on the right side, which allows to recreate the surroundings precisely, putting the trees, putting 3D models of trees, putting their precise age, by the way, in order to get the really precise visibility of these elements. So the area precisely is the other area that you can see on the screen here. And then after, thanks to that, we were able to create a virtual reality model And all the people and professionals participating to this competition were allowed to access these digital models through one single platform, what we call a CDE. And they were able to access and to use this model. And this was interesting because this happened during the pandemic, and each company was able to access this 3D model without moving from his office. And it allowed this competition to take place precisely. So the winning team was this famous Belgian architectural practice called Bureau Basse Smets, and they did this amazing project that you can see on the screen. They have been imagining to plant several essence of trees, etc. You can see that the parking at the right side has been transformed into a museum. And here, this is the final 3D model with the integration of the proposal of Bassmets. So as you can see, it's wonderful. We've been trying together with WSP to get closer as possible to what it would become in reality. And the result is really amazing. You can see that trees, for example, are really close to reality because we had this mandate because of the Historical Monuments Organization. Here you can see different, very interesting views inside, for example, the gardens located behind Notre-Dame. And you can fully dive into this model. I think that this model, by the way, is accessible online on the site of the city of Paris. And here it allowed the jury to base their decision on what would be reality in the future, which each of the proposals also using the same kind of views, the same digital model of the existing condition. So only adding, each proposal of each candidate. And it really changes the game. Of course, you can switch from different time of the days in order to see how it looks like, at night, in the evening, in a different period of the year, winter, spring, summer, whatever. So it's really changing the way, international competition are designed generally, because generally you only present fixed images. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and feel free to ask any kind of question. Thank you very much.
So we do have some questions in the chat. And so our first question is about the models and particularly in the archival records for Notre Dame. So you mentioned that BIM was useful for producing 2D models as none had existed before. But one of our audience members is wondering if the archives of Viollet-le-Duc were useful at all in that sense as well.
No, actually, they were not useful. It's a good question, by the way. So they were not useful, and honestly, we were kind of really surprised to hear that there were no 2D documentation of Notre Dame, as it was not produced since years and centuries, and the ones from Viollet-le-Duc were not useful at all, because they were not really corresponding to reality, because at the time that Viollet-le-Duc made this representation, there were not the same technologies, like point clouds, laser scannings, etc., allowing to have precise representation. And it was really important to have that because, as you may imagine, Notre Dame was completely, so lots of water was thrown on Notre Dame, and it was important to understand if it had moved, And it was also, there was the presence of these Andrew Tallon's laser scannings, which were already a first step, to understand the state of Notre Dame. So it was important to recreate some 2D documents. And by the way, even if the documents from Viollet-le-Duc would have been interesting, they were not digital, so they needed to be transformed into digital documents. So there was there would have been the need, you know, to redraw everything.
Great, thank you. One listener found the CFD technology fascinating and is wondering how computational fluid dynamics, or CFD, can be used for preparing for natural disasters in areas prone to events like hurricanes or tornadoes, perhaps.
It's a very interesting question. So there are different kinds of simulation technologies. For example, on top of InfraWorks, we are able to simulate flooding, which is a consequence of a tornado, for example. We believe at Autodesk that these kinds of simulation technologies, whether, you know, they come from, by the way, from the EMEA media and entertainment environment, or whether they come from the manufacturing industry, we are definitely we believe that it's definitely can help in anticipating any kind of disaster. We use simulation technologies also for earthquakes. I haven't heard so far about tornadoes, but I'm sure this is something that could be examined. I'm sure it could be interesting also to use CFD technology. CFD technologies is used as well for smoke evacuation in a building, or fire propagation, etc. So maybe tornado could be another use case as well. But as I was mentioning, we used other technologies for flooding, water, stuff like that, earthquakes. So there are so many things that we can imagine and anticipate thanks to simulation technologies.
Wonderful, thank you. One listener, Dominique, is familiar with Andrew Talon's work, laser mapping Notre Dame, a few years ago, and would like to know if you are familiar with that work and what the difference is between the modeling that Andrew did versus the BIM modeling that you have shown us today.
So I'm kind of half familiar with what Andrew Talon did, and we have the chance to work with AGP, Art Graphic, and Patrimoine. And they've been the one, by the way, working with Andrew Talon in order to create the laser scanning of Notre Dame. At the time, he was still alive. And I think that, so they told us that, turning back to the question of this, so we've been discussing often with AGP about Andrew Talon, and turning back to the question of this Dominique, the big difference is that Andrew Talon, together with AGP for Notre Dame, at least, so they were collaborating together because AGP had the possibility to knowing pretty well the owners, you know, that the possibility to enter Notre Dame and do this laser scanning. But the big difference is that what Andrew Talon did was a laser scan resulting in a point cloud, and what we did afterward is using a point cloud to create a 3D model, a BIM model. So this is different. If you see it from a digital twin perspective, the point cloud is the first step to the digital twin, where a BIM model, maybe I think the third step in the different scales, you know, of a digital twin. And also one of the big differences, is the level of precision, because Andrew Talon, as an archaeologist, was making some comparisons between the different cathedrals all over Europe, and he was not that interested in a highly precise model. He wanted to compare the structures and the way they were built during the past centuries, etc. So he did not need a level of precision similar to what is needed when you do a typical scan to BIM process nowadays.
Thank you for explaining that difference. And we do have some questions about the point cloud specifically and the digital twins. So Raphael is wondering how the point cloud was created. Was the drone used with LiDAR or a photogrammetry technique in order to create the point cloud?
So it was both. Actually, it was a mix of LiDAR and also I think that in the case of the surroundings of Notre Dame, it was images, and it was a mix of images and LiDAR. So it was both technologies as well, you know. But
Great.
mainly on Notre Dame Cathedral, it was mainly laser scanners. So a bit of drones as well, but it was mainly laser scans.
Great. And what is the platform used to sync the digital twins?
So it's Autodesk Construction Clouds, which is our collaboration platform solution, actually. And it allows to read any kind of formats like Revit format, but also very important open BIM format like IFC format, because obviously all the different trades may not be using Autodesk technologies, they may be using another technologies, so they may have the wish, you know, to exchange with IFC format, and this is definitely possible. And of course, also the point clouds are stored on this collaboration platform.
Wonderful. One of our listeners, Anna, is wondering how long it took to create these models using BIM technology and how many people were involved.
Oh, it's a very good question, and I'm happy to have it. So, because it was a long process. So actually, the first part of the what we call the structural model of Notre Dame, it took something like 1 year. And there were 4 people involved in the remodeling of Notre Dame. And these 4 people, among these 4 people, most of them were architects. By the way, there was one American lady who lives in France, and there was one expert from, so they all work for this French company. There was one expert from Italy, one expert from, I think, from Mexico, and there was a French person as well working. So they were all working together. And it was interesting because they were working remotely. So it was interesting to see that they were able, you know, to build this model. Some of them were distant, like this American lady based in the south of France. And it was amazing to see that they were able, you know, to create this 3D model. So this was the first part of the creation of the pre-fire model of Notre Dame Cathedral. And then there was a second part, which was when we were allowed, you know, to compare the pre-fire model with the post-fire model using the point clouds model, which were the post-fire point cloud models. So it did not require lots of modifications to the initial model, because the expert realized that finally Notre Dame did not move that much, although it received lots of water, and it received the constraints related to the high temperatures, etc. And then after we were mandated by the owner, the EPA, to create also some additional part to the models, like all the sewing systems underneath Notre Dame, as well as the big place in front of Notre Dame, and also the parking, etc. So this part of the process took 6 months more, and it was kind of it was a long process as well, because in order to be able to enter the sewing system underneath Notre Dame, there was a need to receive a specific training to enter the sewing system under Notre Dame. And also something which took time was the fact that it was needed to put lots of protection when entering on the construction site because of some pollutions, you know, related to the big fire.
Great, thank you. We have one question asking if you can elaborate about the parking and the museum that will be around the cathedral.
So it depends on what they mean by elaborate. You mean from an architectural and architectural choice perspective, or explanation of the architectural choice that was made by the designers, or is it more about the scanning process? Or
There was no elaboration given in the question, so perhaps speak to any of those that you know the most about, and I'm sure we'll appreciate. Oh, she just added a little bit more. Yes, from an architectural perspective and the locations, I assume the placement.
so, although I'm an architect, I was not the person deeply involved on the surrounding part of it. So maybe my colleague would have been better on that subject, so Guillaume Joubert. But from what I can see from this proposal, so it was, first of all, it was asked by the city of Paris to keep this parking and to transform it. They did not want to destroy it, obviously. They were not precisely conscious of what could be done with that. I think it's going to become a kind of exhibition area, you know, a kind of small museum, I'm assuming, but I'm not 100% sure. And I think that this architectural practice, BASMETS, from what I can see from their proposal, they tried to stay as much respectful as possible to the sites, and to not do, you know, any crazy proposals like we've been able to see, you know, during just after the fire, you know, with swimming pool on top of Notre-Dame, or a steel structure to replace the carpentry, etc. I think they remain kind of very respectful of the place, the religious aspect also of Notre-Dame, but I could not say more. I'm sure you can find some information on the website of BASMETS.
Wonderful, thank you. We have one question about the existence of these models. So you discussed it, a pre-fire model and the post-fire models, which sound like they were very critical to have. So if a site did not have these scans and modeling done before a disaster like a fire or a natural disaster, is there any way such models can be created afterwards from photos or something similar to help in the reconstruction of that site?
So 2 points. So first of all, the pre-fire model, we've been asking AGP, because at that time, when we started the discussion with the Ministry of Culture, so I think it was in June, let me remember, June 2019, the EPA did not exist. The EPA was created, I think, beginning of 2020. So we started our first discussions with the Ministry of Culture, actually a department of the Ministry of Culture called the DRAC. And the discussions took a long time. So in order to not waste time, we decided to start and collaborate with AGP, because they were owning Andrew Talon's point clouds. They were working on it, and we asked them to create this pre-fire model of Notre-Dame. And then after, so once we went forward, you know, in the discussion with the EPA, which was created few months after, we were allowed at one point, you know, to reuse the new point clouds. But could you remember me the long question? Could you tell me back the question?
Yes, it is basically asking if a building is damaged or destroyed without having any models having been made before the destruction, if anything can be made with existing photos or something similar. Is there any way to kind of recreate this modeling if it wasn't done before the disaster?
So it's an interesting question as well, because in France, we have an organization which is deeply involved, by the way, in Notre-Dame. It's called CNRS, which is the National Center for Research, Scientific Research. And they are involved. They have created a specific platform, which is not a collaboration platform. And on this platform, they asked all the people that have been working for years and maybe decades on Notre Dame to put any kind of information that they have. It can be description papers, it can be PDFs, it can be images, it can be photos, it can be illustration and whatever. And they were allowed to create also a database of existing photos that were taken all over the past years and maybe hundreds of years, because there were photos from the beginning of the century, in order to try to remodel pieces of Notre Dame using these available photos. Obviously, it's a challenge. You can reach at one point some results, but it's not as good, of course, as if you have drone surveys or laser scanners, surveys, etc. If you have enough images, you can be kind of successful, but it's, to be honest, it's kind of challenging. You know, at one point you will need to mix it up with the reuse of CAD documents or hand-drawn documents, etc., in order to combine all this information and get as close as possible to what was the monument, you know, when it was created. Sometimes I've heard also that it was possible to use satellite images that were done, you know, all over the past decades, etc., in order to rebuild. And I think that there is the European Spatial Agency that is investigating in that field to see if they would eventually be able to recreate buildings or landscapes using images that were provided by satellites.
Very interesting. Thank you. We have a question from Bazad, who is wondering about the general process of transferring 3D site scans to Revit. Does it translate volumes well, and how accurate are they?
So if it's about landscape and site modeling, if it's about the surroundings of Notre Dame, this has been done using different software. So Civil 3D, InfraWorks, Autodesk InfraWorks, etc. It was a combination of different technologies. And so this is all about, you know, the landscape and what we call the digital terrain model. This was kind of easy because this is what these software are designed for. Of course, you would not do, although you can do it, but you would not do, sorry, you would not model digital terrain model inside Revit, because you would get some limitation, obviously. Regarding, so, and of course, these softwares like Civil 3D and InfraWorks are able to handle big amount of data. Regarding, and it's an interesting question, because looking at it from a building perspective, it's also interesting to see that Revit was allowed to handle huge amounts of point cloud models, you know, gigs of data of point cloud models. Of course, you need to put in place a specific strategy with without entering into too many technical details, but you would unload the data when you don't need it anymore. You would reload it when you need it. So you have you have to put in place a specific strategy to make sure that your model will not crash and that you will be able to work on the model quite easily.
Great. We have a few more questions. One is about the cost of creating such models and the simulations to use to improve the safety of these historical buildings. This question comes from someone who is involved with the preservation of Notre-Dame de Paris, and she is wondering, excuse me, whether there are important lessons that can be learned for the future safety of these cathedrals.
So first question about the cost. This is something that we cannot disclose because we have I can't remember the name in English, but we have a specific agreement with them, which is patronage agreement, sorry. So this is something that we generally do not disclose, as well as, you know, when it's about, you know, grants or donations that were made by companies, whatever their size is, nothing has been disclosed so far. So this is something we don't disclose. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you.
Oh, sorry, I had lost something. So, regarding the question from the person in charge of the Cathedral de Chartres, it's very interesting because as I was mentioning it during the presentation, we've been presenting, you know, this prototype, which is what we call a proof of concept of the Cathedral of Notre-Dame. So we made a prototype and we emulated the presence of sensors and captors, and obviously an owner, and this is the kinds of discussions we have on a daily basis with owners from all around the world, whether they are owners of historical monuments or existing buildings, you know, etc. It's obvious that digital twins are the future, and if you're able to handle and to manage and to analyze what's happening inside the building, you know, with temperature, presence of people, humidity, etc. Of course, you would be able to anticipate the start of a fire inside a building or the presence of smoke, and you would be able maybe to automatically, I don't know, open a specific roof window in order to evacuate the smoke, or you would be able to switch on the lighting, security lighting system to make all the people go out. And obviously, with what happened, you know, in the Cathedral de Nantes, with the fire that completely destroyed the organs of the Cathedral de Nantes, of course, we could have avoided that, because at least the system would have known that something was happening and maybe could have automatically switched on the extinguishers or things like that. So it's very important. And by the way, a quick anecdote about the Cathedral de Nantes, which may interest this gentleman, is that hopefully, I would say hopefully, and really by case, AGP had made a few weeks before a 3D scanning of the Cathedral de Nantes, which made it possible, because there was, again, no existing 2D documents, sections or whatever of the cathedral, and they were able to create the 2D documents based on these point cloud models. Of course, they could also eventually make a 3D model, but this will make sure that the owners of the Cathedral de Nantes will be able to rebuild the organs as they were before the fire. This is why I tend to say, because, you know, I love the work of Viollet-le-Duc, and for the architects who are listening to this, this webinar, I'm sure they have visited the Cité de l'Architecture et du Patrimoine in Paris, and here you can see all the moldings, scale 1 of all the facades. So this was initiated by Viollet-le-Duc, by the way, and he decided that we should be creating a real modeling of all the most important monuments in France. And they have, so some of them are exhibited in the Cité de l'Architecture et du Patrimoine, others are stored in big warehouse. But I think that 3D scannings, whatever the technology and the approach you are using, they are the future of these modelings of these real modelings of Viollet-le-Duc, and they are very important because they are a basis to protect, you know, our patrimony and our historical monuments in the case of, I don't know, a fire or a war, or what happens in Afghanistan, or where people destroyed all the monuments. At least you would get a digital twin of what was existing before, you know, and it would allow to recreate it. I know that in the US, for example, in some cases, you are able to 3D print pieces of facades of your skyscrapers or or churches, etc. This is important. And I see that the French government has kind of slightly understood the importance of digital and the importance of creating digital twins of monuments, for example.
Wonderful. Well, in your answer to that question, you've actually addressed our last question, which was how you see this technology impacting, the future of historic preservation. So I'll just ask if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with before we wrap up our program for today.
So maybe my final thought was contained in what I was saying before, but let's take the example of our ancestors and the visionary people like Viollet-le-Duc. I'm sorry, I don't know of any similar persona in the US, but I'm sure there is. But they were thinking about the future generation, the future of our buildings, etc. There are two aspects. There is the conservation aspect of it, having a trace of what's existing. And there is also the future. So how do we want this building to continue living in the next 100, 200, 300 years? How do we want to protect them? And digital and approaches like BIM or scan to BIM or things like that, and especially digital twins, but high-level digital twins, of course, using IoT, etc., are really the future. The solution is here. So it's just a question of investment. And I think that definitely governments, owners, whether they are public or private, should think about it and should put some money inside before it's too late. Because once the disaster arrives, it's too late. How do you do? It will take you maybe 50 years to rebuild it as it was built, So I think that we need to prepare for the future, and we need to be respectful with the patrimony that our ancestors left us. It took them so many years to build them, to protect them, and we need to keep this alive and to put all the resources and means that we are able to put in order to protect them. And the technology is here, the approach is here. So it's just a question of every time, it's just a question of do we want to go there? I think it's important for the next generation. And as last point, as you could see it from my presentation, it's not only about the built environment, but you see that also to protect trees, you can have 3D digital models of these trees as well. So the nature, the landscape, it can be the same. So thank you very much to all of you, and thank you to the National Building Museum for this great opportunity.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for that incredible presentation. And also thanks again to our sponsor, Autodesk, for making this incredible programming possible. I also want to thank the audience for attending and for your thoughtful questions and comments. You will receive a survey tomorrow where you can share your valuable thoughts on this program, and I truly hope that you'll take a few minutes to complete it. If you enjoy what you see in this program, please consider becoming a museum member. You will get early access and discounts to other programs like our Notre Dame program this week and other events during the year. If you are already a member, thank you for your support. It directly impacts our ability to create world-class programs and exhibitions. Please visit our website, nbm.org, for more details to learn about upcoming programs and activities. On October 18th, we will have another virtual workshop, Black Space at the Intersection of Diversity, Agency, and Design. This workshop will provide an introduction to the importance of culturally relevant and affirming design principles and how to use design as a tool to create and preserve inclusive spaces. We really hope that all of you will join us. Thanks again, and have a great day.